Welcome to Nameless Debate Radio, where radioactivity is contagious. You can join us in broadening our minds on the Nameless Debates Discord via the link below, and even feature here yourself, if you've got what it takes.
Yeah, and it looks like Brendan's here.
Yeah.
There he is, brother.
I am multitasking.
Are you chatting with Josh through text?
Oh yeah, and
Nice.
but I wanted to listen at least and get caught up on where you guys are at. So
Yeah, dude, I'm loving all this crossing streams, cross pollination.
Pollination, that's right.
I'm into it.
Yeah,
so,
man.
Dude, Matt, Brendan sent me like a couple lovely, sexy voice messages this morning. And like one of them was, let me see if I can recapture it, because we were talking in our architecture of belief conversation about like I almost kind of shit talked gurus and snake oil salesmen, and I kind of try to
dude.
I
mean, what do you mean almost? You totally did shit talk them.
Yeah, I did. I came off a little harsher than I should have, and he
I
pointed
don't
it
know,
out.
man. I thought that you were on point personally.
There is something to be said though about the few genuine ones that do exist out there.
I guess so, but I think if we for instance, a snake oil salesman, there's no such thing as a genuine one. That term explicitly refers to someone who is scamming you, essentially.
Yeah.
So what is the origin of that? Is it somebody who's selling?
I think it's like you sell snake oil as an elixir or something like that.
Yeah.
It was to
and you say that it does these things
to treat snake venom,
mm-hmm.
right?
Yeah.
And so the idea is that if you get bit and it doesn't work, like they're not going to be able to come after you because they're dead.
Oh, but yeah, that may well be it. Eh?
That seems classic.
I'm making that up right now. I'm trying to figure it out in my head. But that's
how good your imagination is.
Yeah.
It's definitely got something to do with products that don't work and pretending that they do.
Yeah, and if that sounds accurate to me, Brendan. If it doesn't work, then your client's dead.
Just get it out there.
Well, let me put it. Let's talk about Osho for a second, because I watched Wild Wild Country on Netflix not too long ago, and when I was watching a lot of the footage of him, the look behind his eyes had that sparkle and glimmer that I recognize in myself as the kind of like divine trickster or something like that. And there was this
behind the trickster.
Yeah, there was this he was able to hide behind a vow of silence, and he set up a rapport with several people that would do his bidding based on simple kind of embodied knowledge between the relationship of humans. So he knew how to play people, so to speak. But
you think that was him? You think that was his? If you watch any of his work, like his work outside of Wild Wild Country?
Yeah.
Okay. So my introduction to him when I was, I think, 19 years old, and I just discovered Buddhism, and I bought this giant encyclopedia style book on Buddhism, Zen, Tao, and Tantra by him. And it was just fantastic. I read the whole thing, cover to cover, and it was a huge impact on my life. And I knew nothing about him other than that. And then I meet my mother-in-law, prior to being my mother-in-law.
Right.
And she was in Self-Realization Fellowship, which is SRF, is a lineage of gurus, starting with Babaji, Yukteswar. I think I went through that and ending up with Yogananda.
Okay.
And she knew of, Osho from the Rolls Royces and having sex with his followers and stuff. And so I went and researched that, and he could care less about the Rolls Royces. What's interesting is, so I stayed at a peace pagoda, and I met one of his students, who's now a master, and she said that if an interviewer wanted to go and talk to him about his Rolls Royces, he would talk to them about his Rolls Royces. But if they wanted to go and talk to him about, spirituality or something deeper, then that's what he would talk about. So he was a trickster. You couldn't tell by a conversation, that you're having with him, if you're listening to an interview by someone who's asking about his Rolls Royces, you think that he's really into his Rolls Royces, and he's got 99. Oh wait, it's 100 kind of thing.
Yeah, playing the role really well.
Yeah, and I don't know if I could do that. I think that I'd have a hard time personally, like pretending to be something that I'm not.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe he wasn't. Maybe he is both. But
that's essentially what I'm trying to highlight, though, is that like there's a benign aspect to the role that he was playing that was in essence like dominoes falling. Like he knew the outcome of his experiment in United States. I'm almost certain of that. Like you can kind of see the way that like every what is it? Every move that was made was strategic, is what it looked like. And I think that he knew in the way that his like right-hand woman, how her characteristics, the way that she was as a person, that was going to be advantageous for him to let her read into his vow of silence as something holy, when in essence it was really just him knowing how to play the human game. Like he was playing a meta game while they were playing a game. And so he could see like a layer above that wasn't necessarily like and this is my own point of view. Like I don't really view spirituality as a necessary function of humanity, the way that gurus tend to do. And insofar as I equate spirituality with a type of, I've taken my imagination and its content seriously or sincerely and or sacredly. And that sacred space, which I think we all can all relate to, that there's some things that are just, you cannot touch that. Don't talk about my mom that way. Don't diss my wife. Those type of weird spaces that like you can read it in a person's boundaries, if you will. And those boundaries that exist in terms of our biology get kind of transposed into the imagination, and then people take it and run with it. And the ones that know, which I would presume Osho as being one of those that knew, he knew how to play that game, how to step from the game into the metagame, from the metagame into a patagame with people in private, and then let them read into it as they were going to, and then never correct them because he had a vow of silence. Or I don't know if he broke the vow of silence in private, who knows? That was my analysis of the way that he was portrayed in that documentary. That's just my point of view based on my own experience. But
so is this Wild Wild West that you're talking about, or
yeah, it's like my
trip, was it?
Yeah, Wild
Country.
Yeah, Wild Country.
Yeah. So it's a documentary, you say?
Yeah, and dude, that's the one that I memed you on. Like I put some datalogical sentences.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
And she's like, I want that guru out of my town. That lady looked amazing.
Definitely. I might have to give it a watch, man.
It's good, man. It's really informative in terms of what I'm at least gesturing towards in terms of game, metagame, and patagame. Contextualizes it a bit. And like Brendan, like I'm interested because I'm not actually even trying to diss on spirituality. It's to me a very valid.
It's just an accident, guys.
It's like, because I think I come off harshly when I'm speaking down on gurus, and
maybe.
Well, I think that there's cause for that. There's good, and that's, I think, where I was going was that, when you meet 3 bad gurus, who
Mhm.
take your money. And I think I also mentioned, shamans, particularly ones that are in popular Western, like people who are doing ayahuasca tours in the Amazon. And so it does become the snake oil salesman. It does. So our perceptions are limited, and then we generalize to the whole because it's easier to do that.
Mhm.
And the definition of the
Deficient
word,
in some sense.
right? The definition of the word kind of is just contextual to our personal history and experiences of what that means. So,
Yeah,
Absolutely, yeah.
it's a good
So-
point.
if you look at, are you familiar with Ram Dass?
Yeah, I actually love that
Oh
guy.
yeah, that guy's crazy, bro.
So Neem Karoli Baba was his guru, and the story of him meeting
Dude,
him.
the worst was Osho. You know Osho?
Yeah, that's what we were just talking about, man.
Yeah, that guy's the worst, man. He tried to poison another town. What the fuck?
It wasn't him. It was
Just to
his
quickly
follow-
forewarning.
and then
I might just randomly drop out. If I do, you guys should continue to chat.
But dude, I don't know how to undo the recording.
No, that's okay. That's okay.
Okay,
Yeah, one of the other staff members will take care of it when you guys are done.
nice. Okay,
Just in terms of like my phone might go flat. So
gotcha. Thank you for the heads up.
yeah, all good.
So,
Sorry,
Ram Dass, though?
Abrupt.
Yeah, no worries, man.
yeah, to hear the story of his guru, of him meeting his guru, is pretty amazing.
Yeah, wasn't it like a really beautiful exchange? And I've only read Be Here Now and
Yeah.
watched a couple documentaries of him.
Yeah, so Love, Serve, Remember is his big
Yo,
documentary.
Thomas.
Um,
Yo.
and so
Well, gurus are fucked up, but like, have you had a psychedelic? Like, what psychedelics did you do?
Well,
Come on, Terrence.
No.
Terrence, come on.
Why?
Because, mate, most of us know what we're talking about. Okay, you don't have to check.
yeah, we're good, man. We've been there.
Okay. What was your highest
As you were
dose
saying.
of mushrooms?
We can get to that
Come on,
later, but like,
Yeah.
I'm interested in what the line of reasoning B. Tomasi is on.
Mm-hmm. Me
Tomasi.
also.
Pronounced Tomasi.
it's me, yeah. So the night before he met Neem Karoli Baba, he was thinking about his mother who had passed, and something about the sky and everything, and so when the next day when they approached him, he was reluctant. Everyone was coming up and touching his feet, and even in India, it's something that you don't do that to somebody in a certain caste system, but
The Untouchables.
right. But in America, we don't touch other people's feet.
Yeah.
So he didn't do it. He was Mr. Harvard psychology professor and everything.
Right.
And so Neem Karoli Baba says to him, he's like, last night you're thinking about your mother, and like told him some things that he couldn't have known without some sort of extrasensory perception, and then their relationship grew. He said he couldn't spend enough time with them, and he embodied Hanuman, the helper monkey deity.
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
The Ramayana, helping out Sita and Ram reunite. But then, so to bring up psychedelics, Ram Dass was big with Timothy Leary and Ken Kesey and the bunch, and so he had some with him in India, and
Shoot. One of my kids is up. Hold on one second, guys.
I'll take that, man. So I'll continue speaking. So Neem Karoli Baba says, that stuff that you take, what is that? I'd like to try some. And Ramdas was like, I don't know if that's a good idea and stuff. And so he convinces him to give it to him, and he gave him quite a bit, and absolutely nothing happened. And as much as you could internalize it and maybe not outwardly express that you're having an intense interior experience, I'm at least swept by the story that it was nothing.
I'm still here, man.
So that's just one guru. I mean, there's like the Yogananda. I mean, his book Autobiography of a Yogi is phenomenal. Accept it as poetry and as a work of fiction, even though many people take it as nonfiction. But even as, I don't believe a charlatan can be that good. I don't think I've ever really gained insight from a charlatan. And
I might have a little bit of a different point of view there. Like, I do think that we could gain insight from a charlatan, perhaps, but the specifics are not coming to me because I'm just trying to. All right, baby, she's chill now. Nice, that's my girl. All right, man. So let's see. Like, the idea that's coming to mind is like, if Hitler said something true, because it's Hitler, was it less true?
That's not true.
Oh, that's kind of where we were going on last night, right?
Yeah.
Actually, I brought that up recently to somebody who posted a quote, by Hitler, and reading it, and I'm like, didn't really spark anything. I was like, oh, it's a solid quote. And then all of a sudden you read Hitler, and you're like, oh, now I go back and I'm reading through, like, what does he mean by that? He has some words about like cultural striving or something like that, and I was just like, oh, like now I know what he means by that.
You get more layers to it, right?
So, yeah, you have to frame it for sure.
Yeah, it frames it a little differently, and I do agree that like a charlatan conferring some type of wisdom, it's not likely, but I do think it's possible, especially if we can't know that it's a charlatan. Like, getting into the intentionality behind a person, like even in terms of Osho, like my speculations on him are they're just that. They're speculations based on my own experience and what I imagine myself as being capable of doing if I were in his same situation. I don't even actually look at him as good, bad, or indifferent. Like, I look at him as like a example of a human that like actualized to the fullest degree that he could based on his potential, and the culture that he was somewhat sprouted from wasn't as conducive to his purposes as American culture was. But American culture at the time that he came, like, if someone tried that today, I don't think the same thing would happen. In the same way that I don't think like an L. Ron Hubbard could happen again in today's day and age. Like, what I'm kind of getting at is that a lot of these experiences that people gain wisdom and insight from, it's almost as if, in the same way that you and I are trying to regard words just in general, like, we can clear them of their meaning and then kind of repurpose them for a more purified framework that happens to be able to extrude insights further into the future, whatever. Like, however it is that we're going to try and make things understandable to our own minds. Like, we also then, like the point you made about acknowledging that other people can still get triggered by any word, and that doesn't just go away because we choose to make agreements about them.
Mm.
So, like, a little bit of what's swirling for me right now is that it's not like I disagree with gurus in general, and I definitely don't equate them as snake oil salesmen, in spite of the fact that for efficiency, I kind of lump them all together, even when they're good. So let's say the good, bad, and the indifferent of all of those categorical wise people, which I would even in some ways lump ourselves in. We can only know so much before we almost have to pass the torch or the mic, as it were, to try to make sense of the striving for philosophical understanding or the striving for even self-understanding. Like, I only really know you because, or I'm sorry, I know myself better because of how much you and I are able to share our thoughts in this exact way. Like, you help me reflect based on the relationship, the relativity of, well, let me just spit some of this out at you. And then you, wherever you're at, you do the same and spit it back out at me.
Right. It's a group effort for sure.
And I think that's the way right there, that group effort feeling, that gurus in general of the past, maybe they've been open to that, maybe they haven't. Maybe there's like maybe there's a subtle realization that is something that they could and should do. But that might just be my preferences speaking. I do think that is what sets us apart, though. The fact that we're actually open to being wrong, open to acknowledging our limits, because in those limits, there's some... Oh, dude, that's what came to mind. It was the cognitive trade-off hypothesis. Like, you were talking about species and how, like, are you familiar with the terms? Say that again?
I was going to say that the Chihuahua and the Great Dane are both dogs, but
that's it. Yeah, go for that. Say that part.
Just that, scientists have delineated a limit on what's the constitution of a dog, and I'm sure there's a good explanation for it, but it is self-imposed. Why is a raccoon, a cousin of a dog, but a Chihuahua and a Great Dane considered the same species?
Right. Chihuahuas are big rats.
Right. Yeah.
I'm kidding.
And Great Danes are horses, so.
Yeah, exactly. Like, that's exactly right. Thank you for being jokey with me too. So that point right there that's a little bit of the point of instruction that I think we can gain from this, in that when I offer my limited frame of reference, it is contextualized by what it is that you can notice and point out from the nuance of your frame of reference. And then in that exchange, we pattern a little bit of what might be actually beyond just that Chihuahua to Great Dane framing of it. Like, we can even call that the taxonomy, because I don't know if it's science exactly, but it is a type of categorization. And the way that dogs are categorized, the boundaries at the extremes, they're necessarily arbitrary, because otherwise a bear would be a dog as well. And like, you can kind of keep on finding a point of similarity where someone is drawing the comparison, and eventually you just have to tell people to stop, coming up with new ideas. So,
I mean, ultimately we all fall into the category of existing.
Totally.
So you can start there, with one, and then there is an infinite variety, or I think you prefer the term eternal. I don't know.
Or uncountable. And there is a distinction that I make between infinite and eternal, but I don't think Matt agrees with it.
Yeah. Okay.
And it's just one that has served me.
Mm-hmm. And so with all that variety, humans and being as clever as we are, make artificial distinctions that help to focus our attention. And
Totally.
if you go and get your college degree in engineering, is that enough? I mean, some places will hire you because you have an engineering degree, regardless of whether it's civil engineer or chemical engineer, when they really have nothing in common. They might have had a few crossover basic classes, but you know, the degree of specificity helps for the intellect mind.
And technicalities and all that.
Right. And so what is the value of that? You know, it is going to depend on what we're trying to do and what scope
and like being able to switch between the utility, I think is desirable. Like the thing that I was going to try to mention, there's a word that I love called subitize, and it means it's a type of counting that isn't counting up to like maybe 5 to 7 items. Children, humans can just immediately apprehend there's 7 objects on that desk, and without counting. And then after that line, I think 7 or 8 is where it gets fuzzy. Then it turns into a form of counting. And so in the, I think it's chimpanzees. What's his name? The guy that does Vsauce videos. He has a series on YouTube called Mindfield. And in the 3rd season, he's got this cognitive trade-off hypothesis video, where it essentially shows. She's singing "Twinkle Little Star."
Twinkle, twinkle. I do that too.
That's so sweet. You can keep singing, honey. So there's like a chimpanzee research institute in Kyoto, Japan, and the tests that they can get some of these chimps to do, like humans can't even do these things. They're basically subitizing number sequences on a screen in half a second, and can put 9 or more numbers in order after a half a second of seeing the order to get a treat. So it's like this unhuman capacity to just, maybe it's intuitively apprehend it or somehow, but like they're saying that the human version of our species traded off that capacity for language. And I mean, it's quite an awesome capacity, and look at how far we've gotten with it, but we can't for some reason like go back to that almost pure animal state that was in many ways just a part of nature intrinsically, as opposed to able to reflect all the ways that we're outside of nature. And I think you posted something about Earthlings recently.
Yeah.
Dude, that one woke me up too. Like when I first heard the term speciesism, I was like, exactly, that's the point of view that like we all kind of, we don't realize that we're putting ourselves at the top of a hierarchy, when if you were to, you know, change a few things about culture and society, and you know, every prepper's wet dream comes true and some Walking Dead scenario takes place, there's a whole different structure that would emerge given just a few changes in the way that things are going down these days.
You think about it, even I don't know if you have Lyme disease where you are, but even like the degree to which people, you know, will not go outside. They won't garden, they won't hike, they won't play sports, they won't do anything outside because of ticks. And
the risk of it. Right.
And I mean, I know a lot of people that got pretty messed up with Lyme disease, but you know, it's who's alpha, right?
Wait, you cut out right there, man. Say that last part again.
So who's alpha? You know?
Is it an insect ultimately?
Totally.
Like the tardigrades or something microscopic, perhaps,
or a parasite, right?
Yeah, and that's the point, man. Like when you take a speciesist point of view instead of just like humanist, like I would think putting ourselves back into the animal kingdom, but then just realizing that we're doing that, so that kind of self-reflective admission that we're a part of the food chain, not outside of it. That there is some insights that can be gained based on the pros and cons of all species interacting in a kind of ecological or symbiotic manner. I don't know that analysis has ever been done, but I'm so keen on at least conceptualizing it.
Yeah, and on the subject of alpha, the way that, you know, it has evolved, where in our society, the alpha male is not necessarily Arnold Schwarzenegger.
Right.
It's Bill Gates, right?
Yeah, it's shifted over time.
Yeah, because
it probably used to be the guy that was strongest, and then
right, the cash value of what is fitness has evolved
totally
in our society, and it's as much as it's an artificial, because that's what protection is. It's security is financial security. It's no longer physical dominance.
Mm-hmm.
But even within exercising, if you look at advertisements for exercising in the 1940s, it's all people like Arnold Schwarzenegger. Like that was the only people who worked out were the people that were bodybuilding and like get a girl this way, and that's how it was. Picture the beach bods of the 90s with Baywatch and everything.
Oh yeah.
And now like CrossFit and there's all these other things that people are just trying to be fit and healthy. They're not trying to get huge the way. So even in a smaller way, our habits are being formed by our desires, being formed by our, I don't know, it's this give and take, this pull push of individuals in society, and someone who gets popular for doing something and then it becomes a trend.
Dude, right?
It's that visionary, and then the trailblazer, and then it's the marketer and businessman comes along and and blows it up for better or worse,
Yeah, and then it takes on a life of its own, which from the current way that we analyze information, it is somewhat beyond human capacity to get an accurate analysis or measurement even. So when people are casting their best hypotheses about how it is that we can direct the interests of our species so as to not kill ourselves while we're trying to survive and make ends meet across the planet, for that matter. Like there's always this this impulse to kind of break from the past and pave the future. But I liken that a bit to driving through a desert in an old beat down Cadillac that, you're going to have to get to your destination. And the vehicle, whether it's a hybrid or not, is kind of irrelevant. Like it'd be great if it was, but you kind of got to get there in what you got to start where you're at, so to speak.
Yeah, that's right.
And the tendency that I see, at least when I was able to break free of the pure anarchist kind of destroy the system mentality, like I no longer have this idea that like things need to change drastically or a whole system overhaul is what's needed in order for things to be good or right. I almost think that it's just our mind. Like if we could change our minds, that would be paradigm shifting just in that.
Yeah, it's an evolution instead of a revolution.
Yep. The evolution of the revolution.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, man. So let's see. I'm hoping that we're not steering too far off into like the future here, but like, because that's where my future sights are set. They're aimed at something symbiotic, and that's at least a statement of intent in terms of where most of my conversations are trying to plant a flag and say, well, ultimately, if we figure out what's pragmatic here and now in this conversation, and we start to develop a methodology and we get to know each other's language, I know what you mean when you say X and you know what I mean when I say Y. We really begin to calibrate that meaning-making mechanism within ourselves. And in so doing it, perhaps we share it with the only part of ourselves that, like you and I both as fathers, we share it with our family. And then maybe that's the only part we ever really actually get to influence in the way that this actually is intending to make that change or shift in. Like I said, I'm just trying to find a way that we can change minds, and of the minds that I've been. Go ahead, man.
How important is that to you? Is to have
I think it's
Would you call it a potency?
It's a potent, like I'm seeking the equation of it almost. And or the algorithm, because I do feel like there's something to it in when you watch a comedian, so to speak, and they can express something that's so, it's them. Like you can see that that's a true like desire expressed forthrightly, and they have no qualms about being judged about it. They just love the thing that they're talking about. Yeah, they're openly, and it sets people free. They can like let their gut hang because the comedian, he was so gracious in expressing the fact that he's less than perfect, or she. Like there's just that. There's something that changes in the tone of a group, and it's palpable. And like you said, the potency of me wanting to figure out how it is that minds can be changed, not necessarily only through comedy, but through reasonable dialogue, through the ways that we can relate on the things that we already agree on, let those agreements serve as the foundation, and then kind of expand out to the edges where we start to disagree. And either we, look at why, or we go double back onto the space where it's already well founded.
Yeah, and sometimes it's necessarily. Are we building scaffolding, or are we building the building? Right, because the scaffolding is a temporary structure that we build to, I guess, postpone, or not to postpone, but to mediate an experience until you build the building, right? Or probably a better example, where if the bridge is out, you might put something temporary in place until you get the bridge fixed.
I think that's a perfect metaphor for this, because in my mind, we're building the scaffolding and the placeholder, and then the building itself comes down when both of us are so inspired and overflowing with the parts that we can't remember of its provisional nature that we have to start writing it down.
Right.
And then that, to me, starts to take the shape of what it is that's being built. So when the words are written, that seems more like the building's plot. But until that point, I'm like always like, I'm fine with not building anything. If we just keep it provisional until everyone's ready to start writing things down.
Yeah. It's I have an interesting relationship with that, as far as, I'll get really excited and start writing stuff down. I'm like, I don't know what I'm talking about.
But you do, man. Like when you started to describe how it was something technical or technological, and you actually had a fairly working sketch of the conceptual inner workings of, I think it was last night, but you were talking about something technological.
Well,
you might remember.
I think that, you received that from your level of, cognition, and that is not universal. And so I was actually just about to ask you if you agreed with Matt, and that the way that the truth is by, I don't want to put words in his mouth, but just everyone will understand it. You know what I mean?
It kind of cut out a little bit. Go ahead and put the words in his mouth. That's kind of where I left off.
I think Matt said something about the way that he'll know that DM theory is true is that everyone will understand it. And I wanted to take that to task, and
totally
just tease that out, because like I just said with you, I mean, you were able to receive that, but I don't know if that says anything about me or if it says anything about you, but it certainly says something about you and I in that moment.
I agree, man. And I think it says something about the three of us even, and the kind of preferences that we've set in terms of our philosophical standards. And I'm not even trying to act like mine are better or worse than either of yours, because I know that mine suit me. Like that much is fair enough for me to assert, because I mean, it's literally the thing that I used to be religious, and then I went into like a whole wandering phase through each religion that I could, and then rejecting it entirely, only to come back to a space where I'm like, well, the room that I was using in my brain, so to speak, that was for religious purposes, I don't need to shut that space down psychologically. I know I'm not religious anymore, but I would rather use this room because it's so like in the heart of the house. It's like the kitchen almost. I'm in it every day, all the time. And why don't I make it philosophical now instead of religious? And that for me it's worked wonders, because in many ways I've told Matt that I've like repurposed my depression side of my own shit. And I know that like the quote unquote obsession that I have with trying to find the truth, and someone like Terence McKenna once said something that resonated so deeply with me, which was once I got over my ego trip of trying to be the one that figured it all out, like he even talked about that time that he fantasized about that, you know, my fellow Americans had given that speech where you're broadcasting whatever it is that's in you, and it's to as large an audience as can be perceived. There's something in me that relates so totally to that expression, that admission even, that DM theory satisfied for me personally, in terms of finally being able to stand on what I consider to be solid ground after a decade or more of basically playing with the imagination. So for me, psychologically, I used to have to spin around and do fancy metaphors all the time, and then try to let that be like the magician's hand being shown. And here's what's up my sleeve on how I made that metaphor make sense. And here's what it meant to me, and here's what it should mean to you. And I went through this whole song and dance with trying to make the meanings of my words mean what I wanted them to mean, in the way that I've even somewhat described in this conversation. Right. But it going completely over people's heads, or just like blank stares behind people's eyes. Or, dude, you're fucking crazy. You're overthinking it. Like things that people could say about it.
And I guess it's foremost important that it's made sense to you and provided, you know, like you said, that structure in your life. But that's the thing that I keep on coming up against is, does it make it any less true if not everyone agrees to it? And, you know, we would love for there to be this objective measure of, you know, say we're looking for the tallest man on earth and we find one. I mean, you know, Guinness Book of World Records comes out with one every year, but we have, you know, in this day and age, a better track on how many people exist and how tall they are. But
right.
But you know, there's a time where I was like, oh, this guy's 6'2", he must be the tallest person, and not knowing about a guy in the next village over or something that's, you know, taller. But we're looking for like that sign that
totally
says, this is it. This is that. Where's that neon sign that says this is what I'm looking for?
Yeah, here's the tallest guy right here.
Right. And then could you trust that sign is the second thing, because we would at first.
Because what's the next village over from that point?
Right, and that's where we come across the guru, right? Or
dude, nice.
Or is it the cloak, you know, in an Orthodox religion, or the lab coat, you know, the scientist lab coat, and we are always exchanging, you know, turning in our belief systems for just other belief systems, just searching for that solid ground, searching for that one thing that can't be taken from us, so that we have a place to stand.
Yeah, man. That is, I mean, that characterizes it perfectly, with way less words too, which I enjoy.
Yeah, I mean, if we're in quicksand or in the mud, everything we tried to build up on is just going to push us further and further into the mud. And so, I think that's security, and that's what we're all looking for.
Yeah, man. Well, that's, I think, what I'm coming to learn about in terms of presuppositionalism. Like, it seems as though just to open our mouths and make statements about the way things are, that the very nature of that act is generally presupposing at least a handful of abstract concepts outright. And if you're religious, it's going to be, possibly more, possibly less. But if you're scientific, I'm thinking that space of presupposition is not any less dogmatic. Like, it's a space where we've almost gone blind to the blind spot of it, and then forgotten that we've gone blind to it.
Yeah. Well, and I think that it's easier to do that when they are literally saying that they have replaced, science has replaced religion in that belief system. But it's the same deal, because instead of a few select, priests or ministers that are wearing robes saying that they have direct contact with God, and the rest of you need to believe what I say. Now you have a few select scientists wearing lab coats who do experiments, and they come out of their labs and they tell everyone to believe what they say, without and so with there's more access to much of science. The hard sciences, the physics, is pretty easy to verify with our own experience. But theoretical physics, like Stephen Hawking's, it's like theories based upon theories based on theoretical math, and it's like, you can't do that.
Yeah, it's not
you haven't seen
not for the average people, right?
Right. You can't, but even then it's like, the math might line up, but the map is not the terrain.
Yeah.
And so if you think about Rudolf Steiner, are you familiar with him?
I vaguely, the name rings a bell, but I'm not familiar now.
So he actually has the Waldorf schools. You may have heard of them.
That's it. Yeah. No, I'm familiar with that.
So he's a pretty cool dude, but he hung out with L. Ron Hubbard and Jack Parsons, who was they're all hanging out with Aleister Crowley, and
right.
Jack Parsons was the one who invented jet fuel, I believe, working for NASA.
Interesting. Okay.
But so Rudolf Steiner said something about, we can measure the heart rate of a person now, and then in 3 days, and then in a year, and figure out the variance there, and then we can project that variance. We can multiply it 200 times and say what the variance of a heart rate would be for a 200-year-old person. You can extend that out 1,000 years. You can whatever. The math is the math, but what we know that humans can't live that long. So it was a good example of how the math does not necessarily, even though it stands up, it pans out, it's not it's not representative of reality,
of the biology that is essentially doing the math.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think I see what you're saying. So let me try to bring it back to the taking us to task on the understandability of our epistemic basis, namely DM theory. So the point that I believe Matt was trying to make, and this is my interpretation of his statement, is that when he said something to the effect of whatever it is that's true about DM theory, if it would be understandable or irrefutable to all, that would be a test of its truth value, let's say. And that's, a butchered paraphrase of my recounting of a statement. Now, my interpretation of that is that he doesn't necessarily mean that DM theory is the thing that is irrefutable, but as far as a current placeholder that stands the kind of deductive task of the rigor of logic and every other tool that we can bring to bear on what essentially boils down to the transcendent. We're in the territory of psychedelics and gurus and shaman and wishful thinking and religions. And I mean, at best, we have science. As far as philosophy can reach in, people have been trying to get into that transcendental layer and take what was quicksand about it and then personalize it. And then we called that a Jesus. And then people would follow that character. And then it made sense and it worked, and people were able to adapt and evolve better and better in terms of like Brett Weinstein's position on the kind of the advantage that it gave to adaptive populations. Just by being religious, people were able to have better kind of moral instruction and group cohesion. And there's a whole list of reasons, but that's a mild tangent. So a little bit more back to the central point being, when we look at what it is that makes sense about the present moment, for me, what I just have to say, the intellectual dark web conversation about truth and politics and humans and all of what we have come to know, this seems to be the best basis for starting that conversation, if and only if we can all agree that the axioms are worthy of a dialectic. Now, it is a specialized technical analysis that the people that would have that proclivity to that conversation should be able to have the capacity to understand it and accept it, or understand it and reject it, and or improve the basis so that it does work and its intended goal is thereby instantiated just in that act of finding the error and updating it accordingly.
Right. So then
go ahead. Yeah.
Do they necessarily have to update it, update DM theory, let's say, or is it customizable to their individual makeup, or belief system? Every person have their own,
cut out a bit.
Does every person have their own rendition, of DM theory, whereas they're not necessarily updating it, but they're customizing it to their own being, into their own makeup, in order to have it make sense?
I like that, man. I personally don't have a problem with that, especially if you can find a way to like take whatever you would know about it. Like if we're talking about you specifically, if you've taken either our conversations, my writings, Matt's writings, your understandings, your history, and amalgamated something that serves as that kind of equivalent DM theoretical basis, I think that's fucking solid. Like, literally go for that. But then also let's check the tires of your thing that you got, and maybe what it is that you have can enhance and be a booster kit to what it is that we have,
and even replace, because we outgrow systems, when they no longer serve us. It's very difficult to replace it's very difficult to remove or eject a belief system without something to replace it. And take this to, politics. Everyone, let's get rid of Obamacare. It's like, well, you got to have something in place. You got
Absolutely.
too much online. If you really don't like it and you have something kind of makeshift in place, again, it's that scaffolding.
Yeah.
Not meant as a permanent fix, but you need to have something in place. You can't let that happen.
For sure.
So. And then at what point does, again, getting back to the dog question,
Nice,
what constitutes a dog is what constitutes DM theory. How many, and this, what is the, it's a Greek, is it Theseus?
That with the rock?
No, with the boat.
Oh yeah, Theseus ship. Yeah.
Right.
Good point, man.
And so, is it the same ship after replacing every piece on the ship, all the boards and everything? And, it depends on where you draw the line. What is the identity? What constitutes the identity? I mean, even our bodies, every 7 years, we are, all of our cells die and we're replaced.
Yep.
But again, you can't do it without having something in place.
Good point, man.
So
that's actually probably the model for it too, is the biological way that our bodies update themselves cellularly.
Right.
That's probably how our social system should be adaptive as well.
There was some, I can't remember where the guy was, but there was some, I want to say it was in the Middle East. Some like emperor or something that came into power, and he told all of his people he wanted to establish his cabinet according to the stars and the way that the cosmos was arranged. And that made for an interesting trip that I don't necessarily remember any of the details on, but I think that it was based on astrology. Which is another one of those things like gurus, and we're making all kinds of ends meet here.
Yeah.
But, it's one of those things that people, including Sam Harris and Ben Shapiro, maybe not Ben Shapiro, but definitely Sam Harris, I've heard, discredit astrology, and he doesn't even know. He like openly, he's almost displaying his disinterest. Or he's pejoratively describing it.
Yeah, along with alchemy.
By showing that he doesn't know anything about it.
Rejecting it without considering it fully.
Well, but what's more is that he, in the conversation, I don't remember which one, he made an error, like jokingly, to show that there was like no association that he could have with it, and I'm reading into it, but
a little bit, but I think I see what you're meaning.
Yeah, it was interesting. The look on his face made it sound like I know I don't know anything about this, and I'm showing you because I don't want anyone to confuse me with having known anything about this. It's not even worth knowing the actual data on.
Yeah.
What's interesting is the further you get into it, and if you read it archetypally, but even if you like, instead of trying to figure out how things are not true, I woke up one morning, and it was probably a little bit more dramatic than this, but I decided to believe everything that couldn't be proven false, and so that was an opening experience for me to explore things like astrology. And the deeper I go, the more it's like, I still reserve the agnosticism.
Nice.
But to think of like how the moon's tides, like it affects women's menstrual cycles, which is huge, for
right,
the population.
Totally.
It affects, the tides and everything else, and so if it affects the tides and it because it pulls, the gravitational pulls water, and we're made up of 97% water or something, all of the stars around us, at the time of conception or at the time of birth, I couldn't say that no, there's absolutely no way that they impact our lives. And so then
Right.
you have somebody who you know as a Leo, and you know a little bit about what it means to be a Leo,
Mm-hmm.
and you say, oh, well, this person isn't, alpha, or whatever, or someone who's a Taurus and they're not stubborn. Well, it's because each day has stronger or weaker elements of that, and then it's not just what sign, what month, because imagine that if everyone born in January was a certain way, and everyone born in February was a certain way, that would
Right.
be easy for science to say, yep, it's true.
Right.
But it is a much more complex system than that. And so, yeah, it's something that's easy to dismiss, particularly because there's a community to support the dismissal, particularly the scientific community and the religious community. And so it almost seems,
True.
that's where my and I've always had a little bit of pride in sticking up for the underdogs, but
That might be it too. Yeah, that makes sense.
the alchemy and the esoteric and occult traditions I have a soft spot for, because they're hated by everybody. They're not accepted by any of the religions, nor scientific community, nor atheists, nor so they really only have each other. But that's where I honestly just find the most strength. Like, it's just incredible to learn what we knew before science knew it. The ancient Hindus knew. I was just listening to Madame Blavatsky. Have you ever heard of her?
Yeah.
Another charlatan.
Fair enough.
But, no, she really was a charlatan, but
Yeah.
she also really was a great mystic, similar to Aleister Crowley.
Right.
And she was talking about how the Hindus and the Vedas were talking about the sun, how the sun doesn't set. And you're like, what do you mean the sun doesn't set? And he's like, the sun rises on the other side of the world. That's all. It doesn't set,
Yeah, it's a constant
but
rotation.
But they had to have known that the earth was round.
Right.
And then Pythagoras definitely knew the earth was round. And then, maybe it was as simple as the destruction of the Library of Alexandria, but either way, we lost all of this information and didn't discover it until, Copernicus and Galileo and Giordano Bruno,
Right.
who was an alchemist that
Dude,
wasn't
Newton, like, as a hobby interested in alchemy?
more than just a hobby.
Okay.
But yeah, he actually has equal, if not more, works in alchemy that he did for science. But that's it. I mean, you think of
you can even think of that as like his subconscious scaffolding that was used to inform his conscious scientific pursuits.
Right. Well,
Like,
and the thing is, alchemy is science. I mean, it was
a precursor at the very least.
Yeah. And philosophy, and there was a time where it was all one, and then individual branches. I mean, Aristotle was kind of the first biologist, getting down on his hands and knees and saying this beetle kind of looks like that beetle, but there's something different, but there's a lot in common. And now we have Chihuahuas and Great Danes.
Exactly, man. It's good. So you brought it right back to that now.
Yeah.
Because that was a really nice circumambulation right there. Like, I think I followed you most of the time, and like you've characterized yourself that way and with those expressions before, but I must say that it's getting better in terms of I do see utility in all that you expressed. I do see being kind of that underdog champion of the esoteric as not only a space that has a necessary plug-in to the theoretical basis of what it is that we're all trying to get that scaffolding on. Like even with the Newton analogy, where I'm like, perhaps alchemy is the way that Newton's mind needed to think in order for it to be more scientific to his conscious kind of waking self. So,
and the way that makes sense is because the physics that he was doing all exists outside of him, you know. And the
Right.
alchemy was the psychological work that he was doing internally to support that,
Right.
you know,
And
because
then all that transmutation and transposition and transformation really is like, when you look at what it was that got upgraded from Newton's laws to Einstein's discoveries,
Mhm.
Newton's laws still worked within the frame of reference that they were
Yeah.
discovered in. It's just there was something that was superior and that worked on larger and greater scales, and that still continues to bear fruit.
Right.
But
Yeah. So I mean, they
it's
thought
not that.
they thought that they were
We'll say,
complete.
go ahead.
They thought that science was complete, you know, that physics was complete with Newton.
Right.
And then all of a sudden Niels Bohr and Einstein come along, and
Yeah.
quantum physics just blows it out of the water. And I think they said something about we've found the tail of the lion kind of thing. Where
Yeah.
And now they would have said the rabbit hole, you know. Or,
Totally. Yeah. Just keeps on giving way to a
right.
deeper and deeper quicksand.
Well, and that's it. That's the hermetic principles there. Of Solway et coagula is dissolve and coagulate, put back together, and so you have it's scalable, and so that's why the fractals, like we were talking about last night, the fractals on a microscopic level, or represent or mimic the solar systems.
Right.
It's really
So?
surprising and really not surprising at the same time. It's just surprising that it's not ingrained in everybody that this is the way that the universe works. You know, it's just when you discover it for the first time, it's like, oh my God.
Yeah, it's such a mind blow at the first glance at it.
Yeah.
Yeah, dude, that's the thing though, that like perhaps that's where we're trying to appeal to, is that fractal underpinning that we seem to think is natural, at least within us, like, and or those that are on the same path, trying to figure out themselves and how we relate to our environment.
Mm-hmm.
At the very most conservative way of putting it.
Thank you for listening. Like, share, subscribe, and join us in the Nameless Debates Discord. We hope to see you there.